Hello, and welcome to another edition of the DevOps Podcast. As always, the views represented in this podcast are the individuals alone and do not represent the corporation they work for. Thanks and enjoy.
Charles Betz. What an honor. This is huge. We finally got it together.
Yeah, I'm flattered. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So can you give us a little bit about your background? Tell us who you are. I mean, I know.
Sure.
I've been following you for a long time.
Yeah. You're that. Okay, now I know who's.
Yeah.
You're that guy. All right.
I'm not a stalker, I swear.
Yeah. So I'm a principal analyst with Forrester Research. I cover DevOps primarily for the infrastructure and operations audience, although a lot of enterprise architects and other folks read my research as well. In fact, I think actually more EAs download it than I know professionals.
Yeah.
So, I also cover enterprise service management. So I own the ESM Wave, and congratulations, by the way, for ServiceNow coming in so well.
Oh, nice.
In the Wave. And I also own the continuous delivery and release automation Wave. So I have significant research interests in both traditional ITSM as it's evolving into ESM and DevOps. Actually, DevOps has been a long-standing commitment and area of interest. I was one of the first reviewers on the Phoenix project. Going in my correspondence, with Gene and others in the community goes back quite some time. We were all trying to figure out, various angles on how to make IT work better, which was a real grim topic, about the 2007, 2008 time frame when you were working in a big traditional shop like a Wells Fargo or a Target or a Best Buy. It was not pretty.
No.
Things have gotten a lot better. So,
yeah.
By way of background, maybe?
No, I love it. That's great. Yeah, you're definitely one of the godfathers of this space. So that's why I'm so happy to have you here with us. So I've been following your tweets this week, and I love that all the conversations seem to be leading more towards ServiceNow, making sense being here. Because we've been having a bit of a challenge getting people to not walk up to our booth and go, "Why is a ticketing company at a DevOps?" Not again.
Yeah.
But now it's really great because this year it's all been about auditability, traceability. How do we fix this last mile? Yeah. Your guys' Wave is the thing that I quote daily. I just did it again down in a presentation saying 85% of companies that have tried DevOps have seen no significant increase in release frequency. Like, that statistic blew me away. I'm like, right. DevOps is really that broken? And then you find out why, and you were the one that taught me why. So can you give the audience a little bit of an overview about what you guys found?
Well, so in terms of some of the research that we've done and some of the data that we see in the large technographics panels, it's true. For the majority of the industry, release frequency is not moving, and we're trying to understand why. You get these little vertical specific flickers year over year, and then they fall back. And the working hypothesis is that people are still struggling with the overall enterprise operating model for IT. Yeah. What you have here at this conference, and we need to be honest about this, you have the leading elements in the given enterprises. And great, we do hear stories of overall organizational transformation. We heard from BMW this morning, but there's many more companies where it is still a proof of concept, it's still a pilot, and those POCs and pilots, they're given the get out of jail free card. They can go do what they want. But as soon as you start to try to roll it out across the enterprise, you are up against decades of entrenched policies and controls. And we don't do it that way, and now we have to we basically have to redo the policies, we have to redo our understanding of risk, we've got to redo our control strategy, and it's not just auditors, it's lawyers now, that's one of the pieces of feedback I'm going to give to Gene is, this year we had 4 auditors on stage, next year I think we need to have 4 lawyers on stage.
I love it. Yeah, I actually had Mike Wolf in here on a podcast last night. We had a great conversation about the GRC and the audit side of things. And he said something that I love, which is, if we could only make it easy for developers to do the right things, then compliance would be built in. And
Right.
I was like, oh, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But it will take a new kind of a new kind of concept of operations, I think, that starts to recognize the fact that we're moving, and these are words that we hear, but they're words that I'm still really working hard to invest with meaning. It is meaningful to say that we are moving from a world of managing complicated systems to truly complex systems. So what's a complicated system? The complicated system is like the Model T assembly line. It takes significant mental power to have thought of that, and it's non-trivial to stand one up and keep it going. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of dependencies, stuff can break. But what an assembly line like that does not have, it in general does not have emergent behavior. It generally does not have cascading failure modes. Failure modes where one failure is amplified and then spills over, and failure is more localized. It's more easily contained, and it doesn't surprise you. The assembly line doesn't start all of a sudden manufacturing toasters. If it's been set up to manufacture cars.
That would be great to see a toaster on a Model T frame.
And it's not that I don't want to trivialize IT systems, but IT systems, especially when you look at, just the vast set of interdependencies in, say, a microservice architecture, and the different ways, when you look at some of the major ways that systems have broken down and failed, some of the things that make the headlines, like the flash crash, the Knight Capital crash. I mean, these are in some cases, like the flash crash thing when the Dow Jones went down 600 points, they still don't quite understand it.
Right.
And they saw all kinds of really bizarre behavior happening in these hyper-automated systems that were, basically these tight feedback loops where the machines are making decisions based on what the other machines are saying until the whole thing just gets out of control.
Right.
And so this is, calling for a different concepts of work, different concepts of how do we think about the human in relationship to the machine. This is where resilience engineering comes in. I'm super excited by resilience engineering and the work that people like Richard Cook and John Allspar are promoting. Is so important for vendors, I think, like ServiceNow.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, we obviously we've been pushing our machine learning and AI capabilities internally, but there's still a lot that requires a limbic system. I mean, for lack of a better way, I think Elon Musk said it best when he was on Joe Rogan's thing. It's like the one thing AI is always missing is a limbic system. And that's very important in a lot of decision making, and it's really hard to make synthetically. Like, we don't care how much processing power you have.
Right.
If you don't have a limbic system of which you are beholden to, you're not going to be able to make the right decisions for a human anyway.
Yeah, and you've got to design that system as an integrated whole. And so this is one of the challenges I'm having. I'm issuing to all the vendors, especially those vendors like you guys who are involved in any way in incident management. It's like, why? Okay, you're painting a set of pixels in front of the eyes of operators who are under cognitive load or under cognitive stress. They may be in a situation where they are well aware that the decisions they make may have significant economic or, heaven forbid, even life or death consequences increasingly.
In healthcare, that's
and I'm especially referring to the WannaCry virus, locking emergency room doctors to the point where they had to redirect ambulances in real time. In the United Kingdom, I mean, I read the Crown Audit Report. Basically, my takeaway was nobody died this time.
Right.
Can you imagine being in the NOC? When that was happening in the NHS.
No, that's that entire vertical's biggest nightmare would be that.
And we know, that when you're under that kind of stress, you're subject to a flooding. You can't think. Mm-hmm. You're starting to rely more and more on reflex. This is why the military drills and drills and drills, because it knows that your higher level thinking starts to really degrade very quickly when you're under stress. Your pupils contract. You don't see. Your field of vision narrows. All of this stuff happens when you get the cortisol in. So the question I have for anybody doing incident management, or monitoring, whether it's you or PagerDuty or New Relic or Xmatters or whoever, why are you choosing that particular set of pixels to paint for for the operator.
Yeah.
What's the theoretical basis for this? Because we've been doing this stuff on a craft basis. We've been doing it based on experience and seat of the pants and what we think the customer is saying. Well, does the customer even really know what's optimal?
Right.
Where's the research basis for this?
Yeah, that's a lot. It's been what you trigger on goes back to when I was back at the bank. One of our biggest challenges was trying to figure out what a good developer is.
Yeah.
And it was really hard because on one hand, you'd look at one metric of just developer throughput. And so you may only write 4 releases a month. I write 100. Mm-hmm. So then they look at me and say, I'm the better developer. But the reality is, out of 100, I introduced 98 bugs.
Right.
You haven't introduced a bug in over 6 months.
Right.
And you're a perfect, pristine developer. And it's like, well, which one would you rather have on your team? Well, it depends on what metrics I'm gathering and how I'm correlating the data to actually see what good looks like.
This is why,
yeah, that's why we love it, because we're very well positioned with data to see data across the service management lens, which allows us to paint. Now we can see how incidents correlate to that and events correlate to that, and we've got all these now commits coming in. How do I see? And I can start to see these patterns. That well,
exactly.
Eric looks like the top developer, but he's actually not. He's got a much lower trust factor and a higher risk factor.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see that stuff, but it's. I love where you're going with this because I just watched the Chernobyl special, and it was just it was absolutely mind-blowing to see how they just ignored all the data and, like you said, got stressed, and under the stress made human things.
Right.
Even though other humans were saying, no, we can't do this. And it's just like, it was just amazing because every system was telling them, no, don't do this.
Yeah.
But it was pretty wild. But
yeah.
I'm hoping that's where I'm really hoping that machine learning and AI can help us be less human a little bit, is giving us data and making sure we understand that data is what we've set in policy that we need to actually understand and govern, right? But getting the right KPIs, the right metrics, the right data points in, and getting rid of the noise, I think, is going to be the trick.
And I think the AI piece for me, I think, especially in the context of when the time tempo goes up, it's being able to point the analytics infrastructure in the right direction and quickly use it to isolate. So human plus machine.
Yeah.
The human using the machine to take time out of the equation. And then that requires a certain level of adeptness and practice. And so the question is incidents become fewer, routine incidents become fewer, repeating incidents become fewer, how do we train people? How do we simulate? I think that increasingly the lack of meaningful simulation will be an increasing operational risk. And this is automation paradox again, which is one of my recent reports. Shameless plug here. We wrote a paper called Beware the Automation Paradox.
Nice.
Because as we get better at fixing bugs, one of the things that we've had for a long time in IT is the repeating known incident. I called it a known error.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this saying? It means that there's something broken and we haven't gotten around to fixing it for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And the repeating long-lived known error was the economic basis of the big call centers in Bangalore and Manila, the economic basis of Tata and Wipro. And now with AI and DevOps, I mean, we're left shifting, we're automating, and we're fixing the bug quicker. So that means that any given bug, any given incident, issue, defect is more likely to be a 0-day thing, which means that it can't be handled by tier 1 or tier 2. It's got to go to tier 3. Mm-hmm. So you wind up automating the easy stuff, and what's left is the hard stuff. Right. And we're seeing this in MTTR drifting up. Mm-hmm. And if you don't believe me, go talk to Bob Davis at Plutora.
Yeah.
Bob is seeing this in the data. He's gone on the record in a Forrester report that he's seeing this, and they aggregate a ton of data.
Yeah.
And so
it makes sense because if all this simple. But then I guess my question would be, why aren't we just capturing the stuff that we solved in milliseconds? And why isn't that offsetting the MTTR?
Yeah, because that's no longer figured into the numbers.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So part of it is the human decisions.
Gotcha.
And sometimes those human decisions are very bad. I've talked to teams whose bonuses are at risk because they put in a bunch of automation saying that we're going to drive MTTR down. And they didn't get the math right because they're those all that low hanging fruit is no longer figuring into the mean, and so the mean went up.
Right.
You know, and then I know
because if the only thing left is complex ones, that take longer.
There's a couple stories floating around the industry where team, people at a senior level have gotten burned with their performance report, their bonuses because of that.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. Don't do that.
But we're so much better. You came up with the KPI.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, KPIs can be scary.
It's
used incorrectly.
a two-edged sword.
Yeah. We had a 30-day bug at one of the companies I worked for, which one of the, God, this goes way back. So one of the NT administrators had a server that every 30 days ran out of memory. So it would be the 30-day bug where they had to reboot in 28 days to keep the server crashing.
Yeah.
And they operationalized that. They literally, when I joined the team, they're like, we have that's part of the 30-day bug.
Yeah.
Like, there is no what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we have a memory leak. We don't know what causes it, so we call it the 30-day bug.
Right.
I'm like,
right. And
anybody think of figuring out what the memory leak is?
That's made the cut. It's in the developer's backlog for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It hasn't made the cut yet.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what else do you want to chat about? What other things can you shamelessly plug? That's a great one. I love that the GTR Paradox. I remember you presenting that to us, I don't know, 6 months ago or so. I'm starting to form that idea.
Yeah.
If you solve all the easy stuff, the only thing left is the complex stuff. So this KPI gets whacked because of that.
Yeah. There's no silver bullet here. Well, I think, and I talked about resiliency engineering. I think, basically, I mentioned earlier the need for a new overall operating model. An operating model is a fairly loose concept. I mean, people will say people, process, technology, but there's more to it than that. And, the operating model that I'm talking about is basically as we transition from, there was a management philosopher named Frederick Taylor.
Okay.
I'm sure you know him. And a lot of the practices and processes we put in place reflect a Taylorist approach.
Gotcha.
Break the problem down, isolate your little capabilities, continuously improve them. If you optimize all the pieces, then the whole will be also optimized. And we're in a world where these assumptions are breaking down. And these assumptions gave us project management. They gave us, very rigorous process management. They're all right for an operational world where you are simply trying to continuously improve and just shave off a few extra percentage points or basis points off your costs or your risks or whatever. But for a world of complex multi-cloud microservices, where you have emergent behavior, the whole operating model absolutely has to change. And what you wind up needing is to look at, well, what is my HR philosophy? What is my financial philosophy? How am I investing? How am I sustaining a portfolio? We heard this morning from BMW, pivoting from projects to product portfolio.
Yeah.
How are we, is our HR department still oriented around bringing the right skills to the work? Or is it more about bringing the work to the team, supporting the team, and only reteaming if you really need to? And I think that's much more constructive, because when you've got a high-performing team, the last thing you want to do is just, willy-nilly be pulling Mary off and putting Stephanie on, because, Mary knew Node and now the team needs to do some Python, so we're just going to swap some people out. No, I think that there's a strong case that, that you want to get Mary up to speed now on Python. And maybe a simplistic example, if Mary is otherwise a very high-performing and high-contributing member of that team. Because that team, I think, is one of the high-performing cross-functional teams, I think, one of the most valuable economic units of the 21st century.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of intangibles, a lot of psychological things going on, there's psychological safety issues. You don't just go randomly swapping people in and out because of some arbitrary skills matrix profile thing that the HR department ran. So yeah.
So many stories just flooded into my head about that.
Yeah.
But
that's another part of the new operating model.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably don't have time to go. But I mean, to close out, the operating model in general, it's your execution strategy, it's your governance strategy, it's your funding strategy, it's your people and staffing strategy. All of these things, there's big before and after kinds of.
So I don't know if you can call it out here, but I saw some tweet you wrote about COVID needs to change, this needs to change, like
Yeah.
all of these things need to change. Who do you think does anybody have it right yet, or is on the right path, do you think, or do we all need to come together as a team and try to fix it?
So with COVID in particular, what I will say this, one of the things that needs to go away in the new operating model is really any concept of life cycle, plan, build, run. I mean, sure, plan, build, run still exists at, kind of at an individual team level. In general, you have an idea before you write the code. And in general, you write the code before you deploy it to production. There are some things here.
In general.
But this is happening now not as these big, writ large governance constructs that you can base a whole operating model on. The whole organization is aligning up under this big plan, build, run thing. There's even an annual release cadence, It's just you got all these microservices, all of these smaller components, and they're all doing plan, build, run in this very fine-grained thing. And so when you look at COBIT, the general macro architecture of COBIT is plan, build, run. And so your basic governance mindset, therefore your auditors that are coming in are going to come in with a plan, build, run orientation. And you can look at the policy frameworks in large organizations, and people have been shipping some of these over to us to go through and comb out all the waterfall, and you just see decades of these layered waterfall assumptions. It doesn't say waterfall. It doesn't say SDLC. It's nothing as blatant as that.
Right.
In general, policy frameworks are supposed to be what, not how. But you look at them and you look at them critically and you realize, wow, there's really some waterfall assumptions baked in here that I've got to start pulling out. That's why it was one of the most interesting conversations I had here. Another tweet I put out talking to a senior leader who'd driven a DevOps transformation, and he said, my attorney is one of the most important people I have, because the attorney, beyond the auditors whose hands are tied and often in many ways, they've got a very strict, they've got a very strict mandate. But if you've got a policy framework, well, who is it that then writes these policies? It's in general it's internal counsel, and I'm not talking about external litigation issues. That's another whole topic, not germane here. But in general, when you're looking at a policy framework that's operating at a board level, it's going to be somebody with a legal mind that is looking at it and working with the SMEs, right? And so, who is it then that can go and look at that policy and look at it, with a DevOps professional and say, look, this screams waterfall. It says that, it's implying and it's driving us to an operating model that's introducing latency and cost of delay, because there's this assumption of this big QA pause, that's just going to add more time.
Yeah.
And I think that this is one of the few pieces of guidance I have, is people need to really start looking for that kind of thing.
Very
so,
cool.
Yeah.
Nice, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time.